Members of the Cabinet, Leader of the Opposition, the Honourable Bishop Joseph Atherley, Pro-Vice Chancellor and Principal Professor Udine Barbados, Member of the Diplomatic Corps, featured speaker, former Prime Minister, the Right Honourable Owen Arthur, members of the Senate, Chairman, Campus Council of the UWI, KFL Campus, Sir Paul Altman, Principal of the Open Campus, Dr. Luz Lonsworth, Permanent Secretaries, Deputy Principal, Professor Clive Landis, Campus Registrar, Mr. Kenneth Walters, Campus Bursar, Ms. Lisa Allen, Deans, Heads of Departments, specially invited guests, members of the media, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. I am Winston Moore, Chair for tonight's proceedings. It gives me great pleasure to be the chair for tonight's proceedings as this lecture, entitled The IMF and the Caribbean, New Directions for a New Relationship, is coming at a time when a number of Caribbean countries are interfacing with the International Monetary Fund. In 2015, Dominica accessed funds under the Rapid Credit Facility from the IMF, owing to the significant damages resulting from Tropical Storm Erica. In 2014, Grenada tapped into the extended credit facility to help the island overcome one of its worst crises in recent history. Jamaica is currently in a standby arrangement with the IMF, while St. Kitts and Nevis recently exited a standby arrangement. And on Friday, 7 September 2018, it was announced that the IMF had reached a staff-level agreement with Barbados on an economic program under the Extended Fund Facility. Within the economic literature, there are a number of papers examining the impact of IMF programs. These studies use different methodologies, examine the results from a variety of countries, and consider the impact of various funds the IMF makes available to countries around the world. As an economist and policymaker, tonight's speaker has interfaced with the IMF, developing adjustment programs in both Barbados and other Caribbean islands. He's therefore well-placed to offer his insights on the topic at hand. To open tonight's proceedings, I'd like to invite Pro-Vice Chancellor and Principal of the University of West Indies, KFL Campus, Professor Udine Barbados, to offer her remarks.
Chair, Professor Winston Moore, and our brand new Director of Graduate Studies and Research, members of Cabinet, the Honourable Colin Jordan, Leader of the Opposition, the Honourable Bishop Joseph Atherley, members of the Diplomatic Corps, featured speaker and former Prime Minister, the Right Honourable Owen Arthur and Miss Leah Arthur, his daughter, members of the Senate, Chairman of Campus Council, Sir Paul Altman, Permanent Secretaries, Deputy Principal, Professor Clive Landis, Campus Bursar, Miss Lisa Allen, and all other UWI colleagues, specially invited guests, members of the media, ladies and gentlemen, good evening and welcome to the UWI KFL campus, and welcome to what will be the first for the new academic year of a series of informed lectures, symposia, and workshops as the KFL campus continues its practice of sharing its expertise with our communities and publics. We are very pleased so many of you have decided to join us this evening. Mr. Arthur's lecture should be an insightful, informative, and thought-provoking discourse on the International Monetary Fund and its relationship with the Caribbean region. Mr. Arthur has recently given public lectures on the IMF in Grenada and in Trinidad and Tobago. And tonight's public reasoning is quite timely. The IMF and its relations with Caribbean countries is a subject that has already generated some, although not enough, debate among the citizens of this country. Therefore, I know that by the end of this evening, the KFL campus would have set the stage to enhance the quality of discussion and analysis about our current economic trajectory and the economic viability of Barbados and the region, and to do this against the background of the IMF involvement. Ladies and gentlemen, our hosting of tonight's lecture not only satisfies a public expectation for informed discourse, it also aligns well with our mandate as the leading institution of higher learning in the region to foster public engagement and public enlightenment. Universities should engage in a range of activities that help to improve the quality of public discourse. Through civic engagement, such as tonight's public lecture, we play a pivotal role in providing the conditions under which various ideas and opinions contend. It is true that a diversity of views often emerges within these scholarly environments, as they should. However, it is equally true that those opinions which are best substantiated and which flourish can often help to form the basis of rational, evidence-based governance, thereby underscoring the critical role of scholarship in public discourse. It is against this background that we welcome tonight's scholarly contribution from someone who has spent many decades engaged in the economic study of this region, and I dare say the practice of economics in the region. Former Prime Minister Owen is no stranger to academia and to the University of the West Indies. I should also say he's the UWI Cave graduate, and we are very proud of that. He has a long-standing history of engagement with the Cave Hill campus. I remember in the early 1980s, 1984 to be exact, working alongside of him in the then Institute for Social and Economic Research. Of course, then I was very much a junior research fellow, so we shared the same building, but not job titles nor work programs. He currently occupies the position of Fellow in Residence at this campus. This is in keeping with established university-wide policy to provide offices and facilities to former prime ministers if they so wish. As such, he is not the first prime minister to be a Fellow in Residence at the Cave Hill campus, and we certainly intend that he will not be the last. Ladies and gentlemen, in this regard, it gives me great pleasure to announce tonight that Mr. Arthur has generously donated his papers to the Cave Hill campus. These include all the documents which he possessed during his 14 years as Prime Minister of Barbados. I have officially received the deed of gift and the documents which will be housed at Cave Hill campus and which will significantly add to our special collections. Thank you, Mr. Arthur. The special collections is a valuable treasure trove of documents which the Cave Hill campus has been steadily building. It comprises the papers of exceptional Barbadian, Caribbean, and international citizens. The special collection currently includes the papers of Dame Nita Barrow, first female Governor General of Barbados, Dame Eugenia Charles, first female Prime Minister in the Commonwealth Caribbean, Professor George Lamin, international author and philosopher, Professor Keith Patchett, first UWI and Cave Hill Dean of the Faculty of Law, and a lead advisor in Barbados's independence negotiations, Mr. Richard B. Moore, an African Caribbean civil rights activist, and very critically, The special collections includes the archives of the West Indies Federation. In January 2018, we obtained the documents of the People's Revolutionary Government of Grenada, documents and microfiche guide. Collectively, these documents attract regional and international researchers and are, of course, available to local students and scholars. They enhance the reputation of the Cavell campus and the country Barbados as a place for serious scholarly research in a wide range of disciplines. As the campus of Barbados and the Eastern Caribbean, Cavell looks forward to receiving the papers of other prime ministers of Barbados and the Eastern Caribbean. I am calling on the estates of past prime ministers to make their papers available to become a permanent part of this collection. And although I would be long gone from the leadership of the Cavell campus, I look forward to the campus receiving the papers of the first female Prime Minister of Barbados. And I have already indicated this to the Honourable Mia Amo Motley. As I indicated in my opening remarks, tonight's lecture is the first of a series of high-level informed public forums in which the campus will bring its expertise to bear on analyzing a range of regional and global issues as they impact, they will have on regional development as well as on security and other contemporary concerns. On September 19th, in collaboration with the Barbados Chamber of Commerce and Industry, under the leadership of tonight's chair, Professor Winston Moore, the campus will mount a one-day symposium to examine Caribbean economies and businesses 10 years since the start of the 2008 global financial crisis and world economic recession. That analysis will also look at lessons learned and how this region may adopt measures to mitigate against similar occurrences. In January 2019, the Arthur Lewis Institute for Social and Economic Studies, SALISES, in collaboration with the Cavell Confucius Institute, will mount the first Caribbean symposium to assess the major foreign policy plank of the People's Republic of China. And this is the Belt and Road Initiative. There are others, but tonight belongs to Mr. Arthur's lecture. In closing, ladies and gentlemen, it is well known that governments in this region are increasingly hard-pressed to provide the necessary financial support to meet our country's needs in health, education, and many other social services. I have given a brief outline of the tremendous value of this university in fostering civic engagement. Yet, in spite of this immense social value and the first-class educational training we provide, the UWI faces serious financial challenges. Many outstanding universities across the globe owe their continued survival and existence to generous endowments. In this context, we invite many of our regional corporate entities, private citizens, and other benefactors to re-examine their show of appreciation for the UWI, especially the Cavell campus, and seek to increase their level of support in many tangible ways that help to foster a philosophy of giving back and to strengthen a greater West Indian culture of philanthropy by a sharing of our time, our talents, and our financial resources. So there are options. It's not only the finance, but we welcome that very much. Indeed, this is a theme in which I look forward to much public engagement as we move forward. And I cannot help but inform you that Mr. Arthur is the patron of the UWI 2018 Global Giving Campaign Caville Chapter. Enough said. Again, I welcome you and I look forward to your full participation in a very stimulating evening ahead. Thank you and welcome.
You know, your program this evening provides a brief bio for Mr. Arthur, but I don't think that brief bio does justice to all the work that he has done in his illustrious career. So I'm therefore going to call on someone that has worked with Mr. Arthur, someone that knows Mr. Arthur quite well, to do the introductory remarks for tonight's speaker, Professor Emeritus Sir Frank Allen.
Protocol having been established, I'll spend the time I have speaking about the Right Honourable Owen Seymour Arthur. I met Arthur in 1971 in his final year class, and I have not encountered a young student, undergraduate student, who could argue and fight for his point in the way when Arthur would do it. Also, I have not since then come across a student who could cut through all the fluff, go straight to the art of the matter. There were times when I set a midterm examination and some students would write 3-4 pages and get a B+. Arthur would write a page and a half and get an A. The record will show that. So it's for me a very delightful exercise to speak about the Right Honourable Owen Seymour Arthur. I have done something which is unusual. When I was working on my PhD dissertation, I asked Arthur to read and comment on my drafts. I still have his letters in my safe, safely tucked away. That tells you the regard I had for a student of mine. Now, I am not a soothsayer, but in 1971, I said there were 3 students I'll speak about Owen tonight. There were 3 stellar students, and Owen Arthur was at the top of the 3. And I said then, I didn't know that he would go into politics. I just said to my colleagues that unless he is derailed, he will reach the top of his career, any career he had chosen. And I am very happy to see that that is what he has done and has made a difference to living life and living in the Caribbean. I recall I was attending a meeting of representatives of international institutions in St. Lucia. This was a couple of years before I retired, and I felt so proud to be Barbadian. They didn't know that I knew Owen Seymour Arthur, and they were talking about this little man from the Caribbean. I felt so proud to be Barbadian on that occasion. They didn't know that I knew Mr. Arthur. But when I heard them speak, I felt so proud. I have to tell you that Arthur, the Right Honourable Owen Arthur and myself, we have enjoyed a long-standing relationship. Politics has never separated us. When he was elected, when he was appointed Prime Minister in 1994, I thought he was the son I never had. I was so proud. I remember telling him, he was coming to Bridgetown, I was heading to the north. I tell him, man, you take over, don't look for me. And don't look for me, I'm not fighting with him. But we've had a good relationship. Sometimes at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, he would call me, say, Frank, I have a problem here. Could you come down to the office? We went down, I went down to the office, and we sat and we worked through the problem. Something that a lot of people don't know about former Prime Minister Arthur, I have never seen a workaholic. of his class. How can you be Prime Minister and make sure you don't leave your office and leave on your desk work to be carried forward for the next day? That is a standard you can emulate, but I don't think many will achieve it. That is what I have to achieve. Now, let me speak to my tasks here, not my tasks, very delightful exercise. Arthur has lived a life dedicated to public service, and it would be an appropriate way to describe Owen Seymour Arthur, Barbados' 5th Prime Minister from September 1994 to 2008, the longest serving Prime Minister of this country. He was educated in Barbados at All Saints Boys School, Corrigan Parry, Parsons College, on the Cayfield campus of the University of the West Indies, after which he studied at the UWI Mona campus for his master's degree in economics. His career as a professional economist began in Jamaica in 1973, where he served in the Department of Management of the University of the West Indies as a research assistant working on a project concerning the supply of coffee in Jamaica. He joined the National Planning Agency of Jamaica as an assistant planner in 1974 and reached the level of chief planner by 1979. He represented Jamaica on UNCTAD, Intergovernmental Group of Experts on the Transfer of Technology, in 1975 and 1976. He subsequently served as Director of Economics at the Jamaica Bauxite Institute between 1979 and 1981, the state agency responsible for monitoring production of that industry and advising on taxation and other matters. He also served on the board of directors of the Jamaica Scientific Research Council and the Jamaica Industrial Development Corporation. Returning to Barbados in 1981, he held the post of Chief Project Analyst in the Ministry of Finance and Planning. In this capacity, he was a member of the team which negotiated Barbados' 1982 program with the International Monetary Fund. He also coordinated the preparation of Barbados' 1983-1988 National Development Plan. In 1982, he became a research fellow at the University of the West Indies Institute of Social and Economic Research and published a study of the comparative experiences of Jamaica and Barbados under International Monetary Fund programs. Between 1982 and 1984, he was appointed to be a member of the Board of Directors of the Barbados Central Bank, the Barbados Industrial Development Corporation, and as chairman of the Barbados Agricultural Development Corporation. His contribution to public life through politics started with his appointment as a senator in 1983 and his 1984 election to the House of Assembly, where he served continuously until 2008, when he retired from politics. He became leader of the opposition in 1993, thereafter leading the Barbados Labour Party to a second three-year to a record 3 straight election victories, 1994, 1999, and 2003. While in government, he was Barbados' Minister of Finance and Economic Affairs for 14 years. At the regional level, as the Prime Minister of Barbados, he assumed lead responsibility for the CSME, and in that capacity presided over the regional process to revise the Treaty of Chaguaramas to give effect to its creation. At the international level, he served as chairman of the Commonwealth World Bank Task Force that was constituted to formulate a global development agenda for small states. He also served as co-chair of the Global Forum to deal with the OECD Harmful Tax Initiative. In 2004, under a Commonwealth Secretariat assignment, he participated in the preparation of the Grenada's program with the International Monetary Fund. He has been honored with the Marcus Garvey Award by the Marcus Garvey Foundation. He has also been awarded Chile's highest national honor. He is the holder of the Jose Marti Award presented by the government of Cuba. In 2007, he was presented with the Wilberforce Medal on the occasion of presenting the lecture to commemorate the bicentenary of the abolition of the transatlantic slave trade. Mr. Arthur is at present a fellow in residence at the University of the West Indies, Cave Hill. And I can assure you I had a recent visit to the Institute and discussions with Mr. Arthur, and I can tell you, every one of us will be very proud to see what he has brought, how he has indexed his documents and have them in safekeeping. He has set the gold standard in terms of preserving his papers for researchers who come after, for the university. He has set the gold standard for that activity, and I would say, long live, and may you enjoy your retirement. Thank you.
Principal, members of cabinet, I almost said colleagues. And should I say the member of parliament for St. Peter? Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, members of the university community, former members of parliament as well. I want to thank the university for indulging me with this appetite to speak. Since I'm no longer in Parliament, Principal, I am afraid that I'm going to humbug you. And I shall speak. And I'm glad that you indicated that I didn't seek to come here, that I was invited here, because I know that there are those who, of a churlish disposition, may say that since I worked here before, I'm only here now because a criminal always comes back to the scene of his crime. Please let me get to my topic. The IMF and the Caribbean, new directions for a new relationship. In attempting to conceive of a theme which captures the perspective which I wish to share with you, I was inexorably drawn to Richard Nixon's characterization of his crisis-ridden career at a time when our region and Barbados is in crisis. And he said then, and words which should inspire us, especially in Barbados, that you do not become the finest steel until you have gone through the hottest fires. Barbados is about to enter a program with the International Monetary Fund at a time when it is exhibiting the most dire economic features in its modern history. The full details of that proposed program has not yet been revealed. There is, in consequence, and that's what made this lecture relevant, there is, in consequence, a pervasive sense of dread and uncertainty about the likely impact of a relationship with the International Monetary Fund. And this sentiment finds its root in the image that the IMF has acquired over a period of long practice as a purveyor of misery and deprivation. Paradoxically, while this perception exists, the reality is that those countries in the Caribbean which appear to be enjoying the most success in managing their affairs are those which have recently or those which are still involved in relationships with the International Monetary Fund. For example, the fund review by the IMF Executive Board of Grenada's experience under its extended credit facility spoke recently in the following terms. Grenada successfully met its original reform program targets, which included fiscal adjustment and debt reduction. The government met all of the performance criteria and structural benchmarks. The economy grew by 3.6% in 2016. Government succeeded in meeting the core objectives in the extended credit facility, supported program of restoring fiscal sustainability. It strengthened the financial sector and set the stage for sustainable growth. Grenada's debt to GDP declined to 83.4% at the end of 2016, down from 108% in 2013. And the government raised total social spending under the program and improved the targeting of social transfers for those most in need. All of this, Barbados, under an IMF program. Following this, on July 20th, 2018, the Article 4 consultation report of the fund on Grenada indicated further progress. It indicated that the economy grew by 4.7% in 2017, unemployment fell from 28% to 23%, inflation was below 1%, and the public debt fell below 71% of GDP from 82% in 2016. A similar scenario can be painted in relation to the Jamaican experience. For a review of its program published on October 23, 2017, revealed, and I quote, "The authorities' commitment to the fund-supported program remains strong more than 4 years after embarking on a difficult economic reform. Program performance is on track, and macroeconomic stability is entrenched, with stronger fiscal and external positions, subdued inflation, and employment at historic heights." A further review of the program on April 21st, 2018, reported that there has been a continuation in Jamaica of these positive developments under an International Monetary Fund program. Something is happening. The IMF is beginning to be associated with success stories in our region. And it is important for us to have an accurate perspective on the things that have happened or are happening to cause the IMF relationships to the Caribbean to be other than the unmitigated disaster it has been claimed to be over time. Hopefully, this presentation will bear out the following perspectives around which I wish to speak. First, an IMF program is not a panacea intended to bring intense pleasure. It is very much still a remedy which entails the application of tough, painful measures. As such, the very best way a country should deal with the IMF is to so manage its affairs as not to have to be forced to engage in a boring relationship with the institution. And if it has to become engaged in a relationship with the fund as a last resort, it should do so well before its circumstances become so dire that the remedy is almost as bad as the ailment. The evidence is, however, The evidence is, however, mounting that a program with the fund can have a positive influence if undertaken on a timely basis. The second perspective will be that while the fund has remained essentially faithful to the purposes for which it was created, as spelled out in its articles, the processes and its mode of operations have been subject to modification and evolution in the light of changes in the global economy and in the light of the nature of the crises with which it has increasingly to contend. It has become also less doctrinaire, more pragmatic, and more developmentally conscious and growth-oriented. Third, while retaining most of the theoretical constructs and the model which underpin its functioning, programs with the fund are now being conceived to involve disciplines that are not purely economic and which, in fact, stretch across a number of fields, including governance, the fight against corruption, social development, and other spheres which all together bear on the degree of stability society enjoys in ways that can be positive and transformational. The fourth perspective which I will want to discuss with you is that related to this, the fund programs have become more complex than in the past. They now encompass not just narrow quantitative criteria, but an extensive range of prior conditions, structural and institutional benchmarks, and a process review that, if properly applied, can bring about major reforms in a positive way and that are badly needed. Fifth, the conception and implementation of an IMF programs have now become more inclusive. As such, much of the success that is being realized in the region from participation in the fund can be directly attributed to the real sense of ownership that the countries and the agencies of their social systems exercise and enjoy. Six, and of major significance, the programs of the fund now include deliberate measures designed to cater to the legitimate needs of the poor and the vulnerable, and to an extent and in ways that were not evident in earlier programs in the region. And the final perspective that this lecture will touch upon is that a significant element of the fund's program is now designed not just to enable it to intervene as a crisis manager. Its programs now make provision to embed in the law new arrangements for fiscal and economic governance, and to require the country to embed those structures in the law to prevent the reoccurrence of economic problems which cause the countries to seek the fund's assistance in the first instance. Fund programs of today's world can now be of lasting value rather than of spasmodic short-term effect because of the embedding of best practices in relation to governance as a formal part of the programs. And this latter dimension, mechanisms for crisis management and mechanisms for crisis prevention, may well prove to be the most important and lasting contribution of the fund to a Caribbean society in which crisis has been our normal and familiar circumstance. And you must bear with me if I start the pretense that I'm a young boy and can't read before glasses and put on my glasses. I want now substantively first to deal with the changing nature of the International Monetary Fund. One of the criticisms generally leveled at the IMF is that with the collapse of the fixed exchange rate arrangements, that were at the core of the original Bretton Woods system of 1944. The fund has become involved in practices which extend far beyond the purposes for which it was created, that it is involved in a dangerous form of mission creep. Such views stem from the perception that the fund was created to only manage a global system of fixed exchange rates and to concern itself only with fixing balance of payments problems, rather than engaging in matters bearing upon growth and development. Such perceptions draw upon too narrow an interpretation of the purposes of the fund as set out in its articles. Indeed, Article 1 of the fund requires the fund to facilitate, and I'm quoting, to facilitate the expansion and the balanced growth of international trade, and to contribute to the promotion and maintenance of high levels of employment and real income, and to the development of the productive resources of all members as a primary objective of economic policy. In turn, Article 4 requires the fund to give confidence to members by making the general resources of the fund temporarily available to them under adequate safeguards, thus providing them with the opportunity to correct maladjustments in their balance of payments without resorting to destructive measures of national and international prosperity. Over time, the nature of the fund's relationship with its members in the context of Article 1 have changed and evolved, governed first by the nature of its clientele, and increasingly so by the nature of the crises to which it has to respond in collaboration with its clients. It's sometimes forgotten that the original clientele of the IMF were industrial countries, predominantly United Kingdom and Italy. And under the original Bretton Woods system of fixed exchange rates, countries experiencing fundamental balance of payments disorder were permitted back then to make exchange rates adjustments within narrow bonds as the main form of adjustment. There was no policy conditions because the original clientele of the fund were industrial countries, and it was presumed that their problems would be rectified through exchange rate adjustments, leading to their capacity to repay the fund. The nature of the fund's involvement changed when the workhorse of the fund, the standby agreement, came into force in 1952. These arrangements, the standby arrangement, were intended to be precautionary lines of credit to be made available in tranches in the event that member countries needed to draw upon them. They also carried conditionalities which were given legal status by way of Article 5 of the agreement. In furtherance of its specified role as guardian of international monetary and economic stability, the fund has over time responded by creating special purpose financial arrangements to deal with special problems as they have arisen. Such was the case as regards its response to the oil crisis of 1973, the financial crisis in Asia, Mexico, and its response in instances where commodity crises threatened to undermine the stability of global markets. The recent creation of flexible credit line programs has been another financial innovation of the fund to create new funding arrangements to meet changing times. The fund has therefore survived by constantly reinventing itself. For immediate purposes here, and of more direct relevance to the Caribbean and to Barbados, in 1974, the fund acknowledged that balance of payments problems of member states could arise largely from structural problems and require a longer period of adjustment and greater access to funding than available under its standby arrangements. The extended fund facility, as was previously deployed in Jamaica and Grenada, and soon to be applied in Barbados, were hence brought into existence to enable the fund to be able to respond to the kinds of problems that were not evident in the experiences of its original clients. As such, the extended fund facility was established to provide assistance to countries experiencing serious payment imbalances, which were due to structural impediments, slow or no growth, and weak balance of payments positions, all coexisting as a cluster. This combination of problems existing in clusters now characterize the experience of developing countries rather than the developed countries, which were the fund's original clientele. Since economic problems caused by structural weaknesses take longer time and effort to correct, an extended fund facility, such as Barbados is about to enter, is tailored to enable the country concerned to have a longer engagement period and different payment arrangements than most other fund programs. To be specific, while a standby arrangement generally has effect over 18 months, an extended fund facility is normally provided for periods not exceeding 3 years, with the possibility of a maximum extension of an additional year where appropriate. It seems Ms. Motley was reading that. However, an initial maximum duration of up to 4 years, apparently to be the Barbados model, can be approved where it can be proved that the balance of payment support is required beyond a 3-year period and that the country is confronted with a cluster of structural problems that need both intensive and extensive care. Such an arrangement can be permitted subject, and this is important, to the presentation by the member country of adequate assurances of the member country's ability and willingness to implement deep and sustained reforms. Such deep and sustained reforms have to be expressed in the form of prior conditions. Before you get into the program, you have to say what it is that you regard as your most important prior condition, structural benchmarks, and a range of information that could constitute the subject of periodic reviews. In this regard, one of the critical prior conditions that was required in the Jamaica's Extended Fund Program was the requirement that it devise a satisfactory program to restructure its debt. A critical prior condition could also take the form of the country having to specify the size of the primary surplus it is prepared to plan for and to sustain over an expended period. I see members of the cabinet smiling as if they're familiar with the terminologies. A primary surplus is arrived at when you net out the interest payments from the overall balance. And the focus on the size of the primary surplus as a prior condition has arisen because the fund is now being called upon to help countries deal with unsustainable debt situations to a greater degree than it has been in the past. The recording of large primary surpluses is the principal means by which a country can, over time, reduce its debt to sustainable levels. This appears that to be one of the proposed elements of the Barbados program that is coming. The implications, however, need clearly to be understood. A large and sustained primary surplus will have a direct bearing on the extent of discretionary spending the government can indulge in over the period of the program. It will bear upon government's financing of its transfers to its enterprises and the extent to which it can subsidize the provisions of public services. It also has direct implications for the level of retrenchment that the program will engender. The Jamaica and the Guyana experiences involve the realization of primary surpluses of 7% of GDP, up to then the highest of recorded by any program under an IMF. Those large primary surpluses have accounted for the significant improvement in the debt profile of the countries, as I reported earlier. In addition to explicitly stated prior conditions, an extended fund facility generally also includes the statement of structural benchmarks relating to specific progress that has to be achieved regarding the removal of the structural deficiencies and bottlenecks which have been judged at the outset by both government and fund to be the factors contributing to the poor performance of the economy. Barbados will have to set out, specify, and meet the implementation of a series of structural benchmarks. And the program is also subject to specified performance reviews for presentation to the executive board of the fund. In addition to these structural aspects, the amount that a country can borrow under the extended fund facility is based on an estimation of its financing needs, its capacity to pay, and its track record in dealing with the fund and other creditors. Under arrangements for normal access to such an arrangement, borrowing under an EFF is subject to a limit of 145% of the country's quota, IMF quota annually, with a cumulative limit over the program of 435% of quota. However, in exceptional circumstances, the fund may lend amounts above those normal limits, provided that the country presents it with a predetermined set of exceptional access criteria. Barbados's previous programs with the fund were under standby arrangements. It has been announced that Barbados proposes not to enter a 3-year program, which is normal, but a 4-year extended fund facility with the IMF. And in doing so, it has to be recognized that it will be going to the very outer limits of such an arrangement, with all the conditions prior, the structural benchmarks and provisions for the review to be associated with such an extreme program. What I'm saying to you is that a 4-year extended fund program takes you to the very outer limit of the conditions. And that for the rest of this government's term, ministers, that you're going to be having to deal with the implementation of these programs, including the prior conditions, including the structural benchmarks, and meeting the review processes that are being built into the program itself. So it will be a different ballgame between 2018 and 2022 than it was when Sandyford took us between 1992 and 1993. I deal next with the changes in the content of IMF programs. One of the most important ways in which IMF relationships with borrowing countries have changed have been induced by changes in the character of the policies which constitute the core of its program. And this transformation has been most pronounced in the IMF's own departure in some respects from the theoretical foundations on which it formally based its financial programming. Much of the traditional relationships of the IMF with developing countries has been to assist them in dealing with their balance of payments problems. There are many different economic models and approaches which can explain the causes of a country's balance of payments problem and the best way to deal with them. But based on the work of its own economists, led by J.J. Pollack, the IMF developed and for a considerable period based its financial programs with countries on models that treat the balance of payments solely as a monetary phenomenon. And let me explain. A country's money supply is made up of credit created by the domestic banking system, or the NDA, and the money which is created when there is a net inflow of foreign exchange, either from exports of capital inflows. So M, the money supply, is equal to NDA plus NFS. If the growth of the domestic component of the money supply, the NDA, exceeds the growth of the overall money supply, it will trigger an equal and opposite decline in the NFA, the country's net foreign assets. This is arithmetically true and is published by our central bank in a table called the Monetary Survey. It is, however, a tautology. Based on this model, the fund has determined that balance of payments problems can only be caused by excessive domestic credit creation. Nothing else, it said, mattered. Excessive domestic credit creation, especially in a small open economy, can over time and will deplete a country's foreign exchange reserves. And this happens most severely when domestic credit creation takes the form of the printing of money by the central bank to finance overwhelming government deficits. And hence, using this theory pertaining to the monetary approach to the balance of payments, the fund program, financing programs were based on estimates by the fund of the demand for domestic money and the use of those estimates to set targets for the foreign reserves, and in turn use those estimates of the foreign reserves to set targets for fiscal and monetary outturns. So if you were dealing with the fund in the past, that is how the financing program was evolved. Estimate the demand for domestic money and use those to do computations in respect of how they would affect the reserves, how they would affect government finance, and so on. The quantitative targets that were at the core of Barbados' standby arrangements in 1982 and 1992 were based on the application of the Pollack model to Barbados' economic circumstances. IMF programs following this theoretical approach therefore set limits on fiscal deficits, on the growth of domestic credit, and targets to be reached in relation to growth in foreign reserves. I said this model is a tautology. It is obvious that arithmetically true, that money supply must equal to money of domestic origin and of foreign origin. That's true. While it is a tautology, it is not a fully explanatory model of things that can cause balance of payments problems. For example, what lies behind the movement of a country's net foreign assets? Are the changes due to changes in the terms of trade, factors inherent in the business culture, which affect capital inflows, affect the competitive exports, and institutional factors which can also affect exports? Indeed, the rigid application of demand compression models that ensued from the Pollack approach did not yield the desired results in places where they were applied over an extended period, almost as an act of religious faith, such as the many programs which Jamaica entered with the fund beginning in the 1970s. In recognition of this relative failure, they have led the fund to change the content of an IMF program. As such, IMF programs will still have at their core measures to control the supply and the demand for credit and money. But that narrow focus on financial programming has over time been adjusted and made to accommodate new important variables which can affect a country's balance of payments, its prospects for growth, and its international competitiveness in general. And these factors include financial sector reform, ease of doing business indices, public enterprise reform, labor market policies, environmental policies, issues related to food security, policies to combat corruption and money laundering, privatization, and other things. A whole gamut of new things are now determined can affect a country's balance of payments problem, not just the supply and the demand for money. Indeed, if you read the Article 4 consultation reports, which are provided for by law to provide for IMF surveillance of exchange rates regime, they now typically contain evaluation not just on the exchange rates, but on all of these things which the IMF has brought within its purview as factors that can explain changes in a country's external position. One can therefore glean the nature of the conditionalities that the IMF is likely to require a country to carry out, which when the country wants to get involved in a borrowing relationship with the fund, from the advice rendered and the recommendations contained in its Article 4 consultation reports or in special reports commissioned and prepared by the fund's technical staff. In this respect, and I know members of Cabinet are here and they read these things, in structuring an arrangement with the government of Barbados to reform the operation of enterprises owned by the government of Barbados, a report prepared by the International Monetary Fund staff was prepared and submitted to the government of Barbados in December 2017. It is highly unlikely that the fund will totally ignore the recommendations it submitted in a special report to the government of Barbados in 2017 on the issue of its statutory enterprises, and it is even more unlikely that the fund will be prepared to be guided only by the submissions that the people have been invited recently to submit to the government on this matter. So what we have, a report prepared by the fund December 2017, this is how to deal with the statutory institutions. The government of Barbados says, I want you all to send me your thoughts as to how to deal with this. It is unlikely that the fund is going to ignore its own advice and says, let me see what you all have collected at Sherburne, and we will follow what you have done. Beyond these, there are three features pertaining to the conception, development, and implementation of recent IMF programs in the Caribbean, which can have great beneficial impacts and are worthy of general emulation everywhere. The first is that the fund has increasingly sought to perform its role as guardian and promoter of stability, not just by helping to manage and mitigate the impact of economic imbalances after they occur. Rather, they are now putting into their programs the requirement that borrowing countries adopt new formal governance arrangements to prevent fiscal disorder and to have those arrangements treated as part of the program as in the same way or to an even greater extent than the financial programs itself. The provisions to embed good fiscal governance are now written into IMF programs to require countries to prevent getting into the problems that can cause them to have to want to go to the International Monetary Fund. The IMF, therefore, has at long last discovered that prevention is better than cure. Indeed, the recent Jamaica and Grenada programs are exemplary in the extent to which new laws pertaining to fiscal responsibility, transparency, best practices in reporting standards, new laws against corruption, and the provision for new broad-based oversight committees to oversee the implementation of fund programs are embedded in law as a permanent legacy of the IMF presence in those countries. It therefore can be asserted that the superior performance of Jamaica and Grenada can in part be explained by the fact that they are reaping a good governance dividend from their relationship with the fund, as distinct from the benefits of financial support alone. It is therefore likely that given Barbados' circumstances, the fund is unlikely that the program will not include fiscal responsibility rules and other legal arrangements that are intended to prevent a political administration from indulging in economic and financial malpractices purely for partisan political gains. Another important feature of recent IMF relationships with the Caribbean borrowing countries is that they have come to be based on the politics of inclusion. The IMF no longer enforces its own procedures, its own financial and economic criteria, nor does it only depend on its own methodologies for designing and implementing economic and financial programs for the states to implement. Rather, the borrowing country is expected to conceive of an indigenous stabilization and reform program, and to do so only after wide and intensive consultation with social partners and other members of the civil society. And one of my most rewarding experiences as an economist was to meet with the cabinet and officials of the government of Grenada when they were in the process of preparing their program through consultation to form the basis of their IMF program. The final structure and content of the program with the fund is determined only after consultations with and inputs from the entire civil society. In IMF programs in the Caribbean, as in the case of Jamaica, also now make provision for the putting in place of special oversight bodies, again drawn from the ranks of the social partners and civil society groups, to oversee the implementation of the programs and to oversee that such implementation are in accord with the spirit that inform their purposes and are carried out in a timely and equitable fashion. Initiatives such as these have made a distinctly positive difference in the achievement of desired and desirable outcomes in Caribbean countries where the fund now have programs. Third, there's no doubt that IMF programs will continue to reflect the IMF concerns for the interests of its major financial contributors by ensuring that countries meet their debt obligations in an orderly and lawful fashion. May I repeat that, please? The IMF will continue to insist that countries meet their debt obligations to their creditors in an orderly and a legal fashion. However, a more sensitive and enlightened approach is now being brought in the structure of fund programs. The programs in both Jamaica and Grenada, contrary to popular belief about what funds does in these countries, contain strong components for the protection for the vulnerable and disadvantaged members of the society. Indeed, the Grenada Poverty Reduction Program, on which its relationship with the fund was based, was designed as a pro-growth, pro-poor program. And in both Jamaica and Grenada's case, although the fund's programs require control of public spending, explicit provision was made in each program to set, and indeed for increased spending on programs to set floors for social safety nets, and to increase spending for programs to strengthen that social safety net. Initiatives such as these have therefore started to change the fund's relationship with the region. For it is possible that through new forms of expenditure targeting and means testing, it is possible to reconcile the need to control public spending and the need of meeting the vulnerable groups taken together as a coherent whole. So you can cut expenditures, but you can still meet the needs of the vulnerable if you set floors, do targeting, and do means testing. And there have become essential parts of fund programs in Caribbean countries. Their success is being recorded. I turn next to issues of special concern. The foregoing perspective should not induce any false expectations that it will be smooth and easy sailing for a country operating under a program with the International Monetary Fund. To the contrary, there are special concerns which have to be given special attention in a concerted way to ensure that an IMF program has an intended salutary impact. First, a country's access to IMF funding is based largely on its quota in the fund, which reflects the proportion of that country's trade in global trade. A small country can have a big financial problem. It will, however, receive funding from the fund based on its quota rather than on its needs. Reliance on IMF funding alone in such a circumstance and meeting all of the IMF tests can therefore still leave the country in peril. And a classic case in point was that of Dominica at the turn of the century. Dominica funding from the fund was based on its very small quota in the fund. Both Barbados and the government of Trinidad, working together, intervened and provided Dominica each with larger concessional loans than the loans it received from the fund, and larger loans without any of the conditionalities that the fund would have required of Dominica. Without that financial lifeline, Dominica would not have emerged from its economic and financial difficulties. There is an even more important concern that has to engage the attention of those planning IMF programs. From its very inception and up to the present, the implementation of IMF programs has always entailed access to financing on the one hand, and the requirement on the part of the country to carry out policy and structural adjustments to correct imbalances and disorder in the country's performance on the other. So you get funding, but you have to make adjustments. And the key is the relative balance between the two. The balance between the two and where the line is drawn are important considerations that will fundamentally affect the current outcome of an IMF program. Indeed, the discretion that the fund can engage in determining the amount of funding the country will receive as against the volume of the policy adjustment it has to make on its own accord holds the key to the eventual impact of an IMF program. If the fund wishes to force the pace and the extent of reform, it can make only the minimum amount of financing available, leaving the country to have to make large-scale, painful policy reforms to get out of its economic difficulties. I want to repeat that. It will give you only the minimum amount, but tell you, you solve your problems by making massive policy adjustments. So the balance between the two. I do not wish to speculate unreasonably on the components of Barbados's proposed fund program with the fund. Indeed, I don't know what they are. What is known is that to stabilize Barbados's foreign exchange reserves to sustainable levels or acceptable levels, Barbados has to increase its reserves by about $600 million. The funds that are said to be on the way under its proposed EFF will not be 600 million and will not be in and of themselves be enough to deal and solve the country's external reserves problem. There will be a need for a policy dimension in order to help to control the reserves. In addition, to reduce its debt to GDP overhang, which now stands at 170% of GDP, to over 60% on a planned basis, because that will be a program. A very large fiscal effort reflecting a primary surplus that is at least twice better than the 3% primary surplus recorded annually between 1994 and 2008 would have to be realized by Barbados over a sustained period of time. Let me make sense of that to you. Between 1994 and 2008, we kept Barbados stable with a primary surplus of about 3% of GDP per year. But the debt is so large now that only a primary surplus twice that amount, at least, will, and done not in 1 year, but over an extended period of time. Only something like that will suffice to bring down the debt to GDP. And this is the problem. To undertake a fiscal adjustment to realize such a large primary surplus, while also having to make fiscal adjustments to improve its balance of payments, reserves, may prove to be a very difficult undertaking for Barbados. The amount you're getting from the fund will not fix the external position. So you're going to have to use fiscal adjustments to deal with that. The primary surplus that you will have to implement is going to be large. I may put the two things together. It is going to be a very high hill to climb. In addition, an IMF program is intended to work by triggering access to supplementary funding from other multilateral lending institutions. This is important, must be successfully attended to if the entire endeavor is to be carried out as a successful single undertaking. But for this to happen, the mistakes and the deficiencies of the past in relation to the catalytic role that access to funding from the IDB was meant to perform, that those errors of the past have to be avoided. The IDB is a development bank and is good at lending for projects. It does not have a good track record in dealing with policy-based loans. As such, let me be specific. As part of the 1992 program with the IMF, the Sanford administration was to be provided with something called a quick disbursement balance of payment support loan from the IDB, an investment sector loan. Those funds were needed in 1993, but access to them were so shrouded in complex conditionalities that they could not be drawn upon before the turn of the century, long after the need for the funds had passed. More recently, the G7 countries in 2008 committed $20 billion to the Caribbean to be disbursed by the IDB to assist in helping the region to deal with any fallout from the global financial crisis of that period. We were to get $20 billion through the IDB. As you're aware, the global recession was triggered by a liquidity crisis in the global banking system. It was therefore presumed that the banking system of the Caribbean would suffer from similar liquidity problems. Hence, the funds were committed in 2008 to a Caribbean Liquidity Fund for Growth Sustainability. However, regrettably, the Caribbean did not have a liquidity problem in its banking system. As such, the funds committed to the region by the global community to help offset the effects of the 2008 global recession could not and were not made available to the region, and in part explain why the recession in some Caribbean countries have persisted so long. In relation to matters concerning Barbados and its present circumstances, it is an even more pressing and urgent matter which can affect the future prospects of the country and which should be taken into account as the country desires to design a program with the IMF. As you're aware, the IMF is not the only entity that attempts to give countries directions as to how they should order their affairs. But at least we have a place at the table when the fund is doing its business. We do not, however, have a place at the table with the European Union, especially, and the OECD when they seek to impose their will on people. But these institutions have the most unfortunate habit of seeking to impose their rules and directives on countries that are not members of these institutions. Indeed, part of the reason why there is a Brexit movement in Europe, in the UK, is that people have become sick and tired of faceless bureaucrats in Brussels imposing their will by way of directives on that local communities must comply with, but in which they have absolutely no input. And what does this lead me to have to talk about? The European Union, led in large measure by the French government, is once again seeking to cause countries to change their tax systems. When I was Prime Minister of Barbados, they tried that too. And they asked me to sign a letter of commitment. And I said no, that I do not recognize the jurisdiction of the European Union or the OECD to tell another country what to do with its tax system. And I also told them that they were treating us differently from how they were treating some of their own, and that under international trade law, discrimination between entities that have the same circumstances are contrary to the laws of international trade, and that they were giving Barbados a cause that we could fight in the WTO, and that my government was prepared to use every sinew to make sure that we were not going to buckle under a WTO, an OECD commitment to change our financial system merely because they said we had to. So we did not. And with the help of George Bush, Barbados was taken off the list because, Ms. Miller, you know that a country must have part of its foreign policy, something called like-mindedness. Can't only depend upon CARICOM. You find allies wherever allies have the same attitude as you do on important matters. As it turned out, the Republicans had the same position on the extraterritorial imposition of taxes as Barbados. And we formed an alliance with the Heritage Foundation. And when George Bush became the president of America, because the others before him had no uses for countries like ourselves, we used our relationship with Republicans to get George Bush to take the OECD off our back. I would be glad if Barbados would recognize that there are people in Europe and people in England especially who have the same attitude towards the excessive exercise of extraterritorial jurisdiction by the European Union, and that in fighting on this base erosion and profit shifting initiative, you have to form political alliances with people who have the same views as you. And that we should be fighting the European Union in collaboration with the people in England who have brought about Brexit, because they have the same view as we do, that the bureaucrats in Brussels need to be brought under control. You know, the European Union, led in large measure by the French government, is under its base erosion and profit shifting project, once again seeking to force fundamental changes in Barbados' corporation tax regime. To be specific, it wishes a distinction between the corporation tax rate on local companies and the rate on companies in the offshore and international business sector to be removed. It wants ring fencing to be removed. One rate, the local rate, is now 30%. The international business company rate is 1%. To converge the two rates without more runs the risk of losing most of the revenue. If you drop the domestic rate to 1%, you lose the revenue. And if the 30% rate is reduced, if the 30% rate is reduced to the international business companies rate of 1, you lose your domestic revenue. If the offshore rate is raised to the local rate or to any part between, you may lose the companies. So the two rates can be converged, but it is fraught with great danger. I am aware that BIBA sought to develop a methodology whereby you could devise a fiscal system that would allow Barbados to meet those, because the former government signed letters of commitment. We didn't in '99. One thing that you could do is cause everybody to have to pay at the 24% rate, but have a foreign exchange earning credit that when applied to exports would allow anybody, both local companies and foreign companies earning exports, to have an effective rate that is now equivalent to that of the offshore companies. This was proposed by the European Union, and the French says, nope. So these the two rates can only be converged at great risk. And before that is done, there has to be a fiscal impact study to determine what is the likely impact of changing the rate, either reducing the domestic rate or increasing the foreign rate. I know that there be a tendency and inclination to want to increase, to drop the local rate, but I would suggest to Barbados this. As it concerns international business, there is no one model of taxation. There's the tax haven model. Bermuda and others knows taxes. There's the Barbados model, 1%. There's the Irish and Singapore model, 10%. And there's the Nordic countries model, where the corporation tax rate is 30%. And they have some of the largest international business companies in the world, but they have also the best business conditions in the world. And that in the final analysis, the issue isn't the rate of tax, but the rate of return. That if you have a high tax rate, but you're getting good rates of returns, you'll be happy. If you have a low or no tax rate, but no rates of return, you are still not going to want to perform. So that the matter can't be addressed only in respect of tax rates. It has also to be looked at in conjunction with the things that affect rates of returns. So that the two rates can only be converged with great danger. But what is the point I want to come to? That this initiative could not have come at a worse time for Barbados. Why? The contributions of agriculture and manufacturing industries to our economy were undermined in the early 90s, first by Bill Clinton when he allowed NAFTA and allowed Mexico to export to the United States garments that duty-free when our garment industry was duty paid. 150,000 jobs in garments left the region. So our manufacturing industry never recovered from NAFTA, and it never recovered from the new rules of international trade under the WTO that remove every form of protectionism from it. Our international business sector really has been the sector which since independence has driven Barbados' development more than any other, and explains why our development has also been based on a sturdy middle class. The sector used to contribute over $350 million in revenue, foreign exchange revenue, in taxes. This was because Canada, on independence, allowed Barbados a special thing called the exempt tax arrangement. Canadian companies located in Barbados were allowed under that arrangement, because Barbados had an exchange of tax information agreement with Canada, to pay taxes at 1% in Barbados, but remit their dividends to Canada without paying duties, without paying taxes in Canada. By that arrangement, two things happened. Barbados became the place where you had the third largest concentration of Canadian investment in the world. Some of the largest Canadian companies were based here. And the offshore sector and the revenue from the offshore sector, over $350 million in revenue, is what allowed more than anything successive governments of Barbados to be able to finance the social and economic transformation of the country. Barbados was the only country in the Caribbean that had that exempt surplus provision with Canada, because we were the only country that had an agreement for the exchange of tax information. In 2008, Canada granted that exempt surplus provision to other Caribbean countries that were prepared to sign tax information exchange agreements. Some of these countries charge no corporation tax. And therefore, there has been a massive exodus of offshore business from Barbados. Some of the largest Canadian companies were based in Barbados. $60 billion of Canadian investment here, based upon a unique tax benefit. We lost that in 2008. And it has resulted in a loss of $250 million in tax revenues to the government. In addition to that, the correspondent banking problem, the inability of banks sometimes to get correspondent banking relationships, are bearing upon the offshore banking industry of Barbados. Some 20 offshore banks have left. So that this base erosion and profit shifting initiatives could not have come at a worse time, because it could now lead to further declines in the offshore sector. And if it is not creatively and successfully addressed, it can put the rest of our offshore business under the most severe pressure. The danger that this new threat poses for Barbados is of very significant economic importance. Why do I say that? In 1992, when Erskine Sandiford took Barbados to the International Monetary Fund, it was pre-WTO, and we still had manufacturing and agriculture that were protected. The best days of the offshore sector were still before us. Barbados will go into an IMF program in 2018. Agriculture, manufacturing devastated by WTO rules, and the sectoral foundations of our economy are now more vulnerable and more fragile than was the case when Erskine Sandiford sought the assistance of the fund. Our issue is not going to be how to deal with the reserves, nor how to deal only with the debt. Those things can be managed. Our problem will be how to run a society where the economy is hardly viable. And the great challenge has now to be to rebalance the relationship between the social system and the economic system, because Barbados has reached a stage where the social system is too large for the economy to carry because of the loss of international business and the problems that have ensued in manufacturing and agriculture. So we have to get the matter with the offshore sector right, because the economy is now more vulnerable and fragile than it was when Erskine Sandiford went to the fund. And I leave you therefore with these thoughts, that the future of our economy and society may come to depend not only on how we master the design of the program with the fund, but it may depend even more on how we address the challenges being imposed on us by international organizations to which we do not belong. To have to grapple with implementation an IMF Enhanced Facility Fund program while fending off a challenge from the European Union and the OECD is not a challenge for the faint-hearted. But it is the essence of the challenge that this country must confront and must successfully meet over the short term. And if you would allow me to end as I began, by citing Nixon on his own crisis, as I speak from the safety of this institution rather than cabinet. The challenge that will confront us, will bring the exquisite agony that we will not want to live through again, but will engage us in an intellectual exercise which no one at all should wish to miss. And I thank you for the opportunity to make these points at the University of Barbados.